Chuck Cooper is the founder of Whitewater Consulting, a business consulting practice that specializes in human resources for small and mid-sized companies. Chuck is committed to the mission of serving small and mid-sized business owners by providing clarity and peace of mind through HR solutions. His passion includes reconnecting leaders with their people and guiding them in the journey of building trust and respect throughout the company and with their stakeholders. Chuck is the author of Unprecedented, Building a Multi-Generational Business on Trust, Respect, and the Valuing of People. Chuck and his wife, Debbie, reside in Charlotte, North Carolina, have been married for 38 years, are the parents of 3 adult children, and have been blessed with 8 grandkids. Chuck, happy to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
It is great to be here. I've been looking forward to our conversation and certainly am excited to be a part of this podcast.
Absolutely. So you and I were introduced recently. How would you describe what you do in just 3 words? A little bit of a challenge for you.
That is definitely a challenge, especially whenever you have as wide an offering as we do at Whitewater Consulting. I would say that probably the way that I would answer the question, the 3 words that best describe what we do is we educate, we serve, and we support business owners as it relates to really being able to increase the value of their business through their greatest asset, which is their people.
Very cool. So you've connected those 3 words to the greatest to an organization's most valuable asset, the people. Can you give us an overview of your journey and experience thus far in human resources and an organization's greatest asset, which are the people?
So my background really, as I look back over the last 25 to 30 years of my career, it has been really involved with being involved at the ownership level, from organizations in the agriculture industry to financial services to hospitality. And ultimately, when I started Whitewater in 2019, it's really a roll-up of everything that I've been involved in, during that time frame. And what's really been interesting through that journey has been the fact that, if I've heard it once, I've heard it probably 100 times, probably 1,000 times, that my business is unique. And so how can you help me? The reality is, when it comes back to people and people being your greatest asset, it really doesn't matter what generation they come from or what industry they're involved in. The people challenges are pretty consistent across all companies.
That makes total sense. If you had to summarize what problem Whitewater Consulting solves, what problem are you trying to solve, and who specifically are you serving?
So the majority of our clients really kind of, they range in size from, say, 15 to 20 employees to probably about as large as 500 employees, and really in all different industries. What we really look for as far as the type of companies that we want to work with are really looking at the leadership and looking at their mindset that they have. One is, are they valuing their people? Do they see their people as an asset and maybe their greatest asset? Are they open to coaching? Are they open-minded and to looking at things from a different perspective as it relates to trying to solve problems that they've been facing? And so I think that's, the type of market that we really focus on. We can work with companies throughout the U.S. or from coast to coast. We have clients today. But I think that when you kind of bring things back to the area and the specific area that we focus on, it really kind of comes back to, in today's world, really to company culture. It comes back to leadership and manager training and being able to really reconnect the organization from top to bottom as it relates to building trust, and really being able to, to rebuild relationships between those different levels of the organization so that you're all focused on maybe working toward having a common vision, working with a common mission in mind, and ultimately trying to do things in a way that's consistent throughout the organization as you serve and grow your business.
Understood. What first drew you to this line of work?
So in my background, one of my greatest learning opportunities was I was involved in a business at the ownership level where we had a really successful business. At that point in time, I really thought that I wanted to be that CEO, that I wanted to be, the one that had a huge successful business ideally in a small community. Um, and long story short, we got into that business. The company was really, really successful, but I let pride and ego and success get in the way of making really good business decisions at that point in my life. But one of the things I took away from that was that I did not need to be in the limelight. I didn't need to be the person or the face of the organization. I wanted to be able to serve and to support those people that were in leadership roles within small and mid-sized companies. I look at entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship as being something that really differentiates the United States from most other countries in the world today with the opportunity that we have. And so for those entrepreneurs to really take a step out in faith or take that risk of walking away from a security of a paycheck or from benefits to try to start a company and to try to fill a need in the market. And from that, being able to hire people and start to grow their business. And that I just have huge respect and admiration for those people that do that. So my heart, my mission, my passion really comes back to I want to be able to help serve and support and lift up those people that are in leadership roles within small and mid-sized companies.
Excellent. Yeah, you brought up a good point. I've been fortunate enough to travel to different countries around the world just in my free time. It's one of my biggest passions. And it's true what you say, like the US, we have such a culture of like, we can do it all. Like there's something in us that we can just accomplish it. And I don't see that everywhere, at least where I've been, like in the Mediterranean or in the UK. Like I don't see that same sort of attitude and that like just confidence, that raw confidence. So yeah, it's an interesting point.
I think the other thing is a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of people over the years, particularly those people that have gotten up in age, and talk with them about their life. And one of the greatest regrets that's most often shared with me is the fact that if the one thing that they regret the most was that they did not take the opportunity to act on that desire that they had to start a business, to step out and to launch. And they feel like that's their greatest regret. And so I think that, when you look at people today, they're the young entrepreneurs today, again, they're in that same situation where they have the opportunity to step out to do it. They're afraid to do so because of failure. And my whole mindset over the years has shifted dramatically when it comes to failure, because I grew up in a family and had a mindset and a perspective that if you failed, that you were a failure. And the reality is today that perspective has changed to where if you fail, it's a learning opportunity. I mean, it's not the end and you're not a failure. It's just an opportunity to learn from that mistake that was made and be able to help kind of really direct or maybe redirect the path that you're on for that next opportunity. So I think we have to look at failing as a positive, not as a negative.
That's a great insight. And you mentioned culture before, which is a word that's used a lot in different companies. What does that word mean to you, and how do you connect that with being okay with failing?
I thought you say culture.
Yes.
See, I think when it comes back to culture, I think, from my perspective, the culture of an organization starts at the top. So it starts with the business owner or the CEO. And I think that when you start looking at the word failure or failing, I think that you have to create, in today's world, you've got to create the opportunity for your people to really to be able to empower them, to be able to have some ownership and to be able to make some decisions for their team or for their department, and recognize that they're going to make mistakes along the way. So there's going to be an opportunity for them to either have success, or they're also going to be able to see opportunity to fail. And when they fail, well, again, we have to really be able to look back on why did we fail? What did we learn from this? And how can we really take that understanding and that knowledge that we've gained from it and be able to apply that to to becoming a better organization through that. So I think when it comes back to culture, a lot of times I walk in and I ask a business owner, describe your culture and they oftentimes they will start with the values of the organization. And I think that it actually, from what I've seen, it actually goes a little bit deeper than that, to where you can take the values of the organization, but the question becomes is what actions are there that you want your people to take that's going to be able to support those values that you are promoting to your employees and to your customers, and really to your to the community that you're a part of. And I think that's where those actions that you are looking at. David Friedman wrote a book, Culture by Design, and I think it's a phenomenal book. It's kind of my go-to and my Bible that I refer to when I'm talking with my clients about helping them with their culture. And David talks about the fundamentals being the actions that really support those values, because values in some cases really can be not objective, but can become very subjective. And so when you have that, there's inconsistency in actions that you recognize the support the overarching values. But when you come back and go to the fundamentals, it provides real clarity throughout from top to bottom.
Mm-hmm. So is your thought process that if an organization can communicate their values clearly and create a culture, a specific type of culture for its employees, that the people there will want to stay, the people there will want to do their best work, and thus create value within the organization?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah, and I think that's where, when you get that, when you have people that they understand the values, they buy into the values, they are really connected, and they become, it really becomes an added asset to the company, and they feel like they've got ownership in their role. They see how what the work that they do, how that impacts the organization and the success that they have, and that promotes, confidence, and really helps the employees be able to really buy in again to the mission and the vision of the company as well. So it really does. All of that leads to greater productivity and to the bottom line of the organization.
That's a great point and a very great insight, because I think, especially I guess in my world, my background being in marketing, we always focus on what are the strategies and the tactics we can take to get more, to do more, but ultimately it's the people that are executing it. So how are you treating the people? How are you helping them grow? How are you mentoring them and whatnot? So great insight there. Cool. Let's take a turn to leadership. I know you mentioned it has to start at the top. So what are the foundational areas of leadership? I know you have a 5 C's framework. Can you expand on that?
I would be happy to. So as it comes to the 5 C's, and I put this together a couple of years ago as I wrote my book, Unprecedented. The 5 C's really start with connection, commitment, caring, remaining curious, and then the 5th C on that is communication. And so when you look at those C's, starting with connection, as a business owner, and again, we're trying to really focus on ways that's going to build trust, build relationships throughout your organization, starting to be able to connect with your people. And that means in many cases, we have to get out of our offices and really be out if you're in a manufacturing facility, you have to be out in the plant, on the floor, being with your people so that you can start to have conversations with them. So you connect with them. And as part of that connection, it's really, saying hello to them when they come to work. It's thanking them when they leave to go home at the end of the day. But it's not just to your people, but it's also connecting with the other shareholders or stockholders within the company. It's also being able to connect with your community leaders so that, you have, and also with your customers or your clients as well. So there's a lot of connection points that a business owner really needs to focus on. And then when it comes to the next C, which is commitment, this really kind of goes back to looking at your mission, vision, values, making sure that those statements that you have, that you're 100% confident that is who you are, not just as a organization, but that's who you are as a leader too, because there has to be alignment there with the values between you as a person and your company. Because if you don't have that, when you're coming to work and you're not in alignment there, your entire organization is going to have challenges and, just in the buy-in and from the engagement from your people. So you have connection, then you have commitment, then you have care. And care comes back to you're really just bringing being a human back to leadership. And we saw some really great examples of this as we went through the pandemic. A lot of times we saw, when we went to shelter in place and we sent all of our people home working remote, we still had business leaders that were really focused on staying connected with their people by creating videos, by creating communications, updating them on, what the status was with the company and what the leadership team was working on. And what we saw from that as it came through the pandemic was the fact that those companies that had leadership remaining engaged with their people, the company was able to actually thrive throughout that time rather than just trying to survive. And then next we have remaining curious. I think as a leadership and our own personal growth, it's a journey. There is not a destination to where you say, all right, I've got all the answers and I've arrived. So we have to remain curious. And when you remain curious as a leader, innovation takes place. You're able to really work together in a collaborative style to where you actually bring people along with you on that journey. And so from that, you're getting buy-in from your people, and your people are feeling like they have some ownership in some of the decision-making process. You ultimately still own that as the leader, but you're gaining other perspectives. And I think from experience, that gaining other perspectives leads to wisdom and to better results. And then the fifth C that kind of ties all of this together is communication. And again, it goes back to, not only it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. It's the rhythm that you have with your communication. And also, it doesn't mean just talking. A lot of times the communication piece to this is actually sitting with your people and listening to what they're saying, understanding what's important to them, and understanding not just as from a team or from a company perspective, but in your smaller companies, it's actually getting to know that individual employee on a personal level. So you understand what's going on even in their home life, because you know that what happens there has a direct impact on their ability to perform when they come to work.
I love that framework. I mean, I think it captures everything just perfectly. What do you think most don't understand about leadership?
I think that's really a great question. I think when it comes to leadership, that I think a lot of times from a leadership perspective, our focus has been on the KPI of what is our ultimate profitability. Profitability determines and really is kind of the definition for success for a business. I think what they miss is that there's a balance between profit and people. And if you want to build a business for the long term that's going to be successful, you have to have both profit and people to be able to achieve that level of success.
Great point. Very great point. What are some of the bad recommendations you hear about leadership?
I think one of the things that's been highlighted, especially in the last 3 years, has been the fact that the way that we've always done things is the right way. And, we are not being open-minded to new ways of achieving better results. And I see that a lot today. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons we see a lot of business owners today that have been in business for decades that are finally reaching a point where they're, in some cases, just throwing their hands up saying, all right, I've had enough. I can't continue to change, or I can't continue to accommodate all of the changes that we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years. I need to get out. And so I think in some cases, that has led to some, business owners where they've lost their passion for the work that they do, and really lost kind of the vision of the organization as well. So I think if the reality is, If we feel like change is happening so fast today, we really need to be concerned about that, because as we look to the end of this decade and we look to the end of the next decade up through the 2030s, the rate of change is going to continue to really pick up and really to continue to grow. Studies are showing right now that the pace of change will be 4 times what it is today by the end of 2020s, and will be 16 times as fast at the end of 2030. So we have to be able to adapt and become agile when it comes to being a leader.
Wow, that is a crazy pace of change. And I guess with technology and AI and everything, it's just like breezing on by.
Well, exactly. And when it comes to AI, I mean, there's so much excitement and so much buzz around AI today. The reality is in many cases, we don't have clarity as to what that end result's going to be and how that's going to impact companies or how that's going to impact people, and our society.
Very true. What would you say is the best way to guarantee failure in leadership?
I think not subscribing to those 5 C's. I think if you want to guarantee failure, remain closed-minded, remain focused on continuing to use processes that you have used for decades and not recognizing the change that has happened.
Very true. I took that question actually from the late Charlie Munger, who passed yesterday.
Oh man, I certainly hated to hear the passing of that news. He's such a great guy, and there is so much wisdom that he offered to the world. And I think a lot of that we're going to reflect on a great deal in the coming days.
Absolutely. Such a great thinker and communicator, very witty, which is great. And his thing about having a lattice work of mental models has always just inspired me to get better at that. Not just asking the straightforward question, but invert that thought into not what do you want to do, but what don't you want to do? And from there, you can get a better answer. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think a lot of when it comes back to this entrepreneur and to the C-suite, I think that perspective of being able to look at a decision and look, from a decision-making process, to be able to look forward and see what is it that, to your point, looking at what there is to gain, but then being able to reflect back, and look at what are you actually running away from. It's just that difference in perspective will help you make much better decisions for the long run. Very true.
You can't get the best answers if you don't ask the right questions. So that's always something to think about.
It really is. I always enjoyed listening to Charlie Munger and to Warren Buffett talking at their annual meeting. I thought I think the way that they approach their engagement with their shareholders, and they're making themselves available. It's a great model for a lot of other business owners to follow.
Definitely. And it's such practical and simple advice, but simple isn't always easy. It's not always easy to follow, but it is simple to comprehend, to understand. So it's just the execution of it, which I always celebrate.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think a lot of times we try to overcomplicate things to make, and to be able to change that and to make things really simple and easy for people to understand. I think it's really important. And I think with all the change that's occurring now and the change that we're going to be seeing in the future, again, being able to simplify that and being able to communicate it clearly is going to become really important for leaders.
Absolutely. Chuck, if you could only invest 2 hours per week on improving your skills in leadership, where would you focus on?
This may be a little bit of a surprise. I would probably focus that 2 hours a week on journaling and writing, because I think we gain a much deeper, oftentimes a much different perspective on our past, as well as what, being able to kind of really articulate what we want our future to look like. And I think that it just brings, it brings a lot of clarity when you go through that process. I did not really subscribe to that until I went through the process of writing my book, in 21 and 22. And from that, that's been one of the greatest aha moments that I've had probably in the last 10 years.
I love that insight. I don't know if it was Richard Feynman that said, like, if you can't impart that information that you have in your head to like a child, you haven't truly learned or mastered something. And how could you do that unless you actually are able to write it down and put it into words? Because then you don't have like a bunch of obscurities or, weird ideas in your head. Now you have to actually define it clearly. So such a great insight that you should journal and write it down, because again, you'll find all the little holes in what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know about most people, but for myself, it's really been enjoyable, to be able to continue that process of journaling, but being able to go back over the years and look at, what was written on this day a year ago or 2 years ago. It just brings back a lot of great memories and a lot of great insight. So it works for me personally and professionally.
I might have to pick that up as a habit to start doing, because I unfortunately don't do that, but that might be a good way for me to start.
I would encourage you with that question. I think that even if you do it just for a short period of time, you'll be amazed at what you'll learn from it.
I can imagine. Awesome. All right, let's take a quick turn here to employee engagement, which I know is something that Whitewater does very well. What common challenges or mistakes do you see around employee engagement?
I think really understanding what employee engagement is probably a good place to start. And I think that, again, when you look at the last 3 to 5 years, maybe even going back over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of businesses that do surveys. We gather information on what we believe employee engagement is. But I think that where we missed the mark is how we actually go about changing that or improving those different levels. And I think part of the challenge there is that oftentimes I think as leaders, we don't really know we don't understand how to go about fixing that problem. And so I think that's where, when you look at employee engagement and you look at what studies show today, it's been pretty consistent over the last 10 to 15 years. And it's really been pretty dismal when you look at the results, because an overwhelming majority of your people are either just basically just showing up and they're doing just enough to get by, or they are actively disengaged, meaning they are working against the organization versus working for the organization. And so I think, when you look at studies, you're looking at, basically less than a third of your employees are actively engaged. Wow. And so I think that's just it. Again, that is a key area. And I think part of that challenge there is the fact that leadership doesn't really know how to change that. And obviously mid-level managers, they're feeling the pressure in their role from the employees that they're working with. And they're also getting a lot of pressure from the C-suite or from the business owner coming down. They really don't know how to go about solving that problem either. So that's kind of where our focus is right now.
That's big. And so in solving that problem, what solutions or approaches can be used to overcome any challenges in employee engagement?
So what's really interesting, from my perspective, I think that, again, going back to the 5 C's, because I think that the answer here starts with leadership. And so being able to come back, being able to, again, to connect with your people, being able to build relationships and talking with your people and listening to your people, building trust in those relationships, you will get a different output and a different outcome from the production in your company just by doing that. But we also have to become really clear in what the mission and the vision and the values of the organization are. And I think the other thing to help with the engagement here is to be able to not only be able to communicate the ultimate mission of the organization, but to be able to align the individual employee with what their purpose is. How do you go about aligning that purpose from the individual to the company so they fully understand the work that they're doing and how that impacts the overall success of the company? And to be able to understand what your purpose is means I have to be able to sit down with you, get to know you, ask questions, and hear, really what's important to you.
Excellently put. Well, Chuck, as we round out this podcast, I'd like to ask a few rapid fire questions. I always think it's interesting to see someone's worldview and how they perceive things, because how I perceive things might be different than how you perceive it. And it's always great to see how different it might be, like how we look at different things, how we interpret different things. And so with that said, my first rapid fire question to you is, what contrarian or non-conventional belief do you have?
What's really interesting on that, to your point on this question, I've looked at the way I've got 3 kids. They're all 3 are adults, but I've looked at the way that I parented them, and I look at how that flows over to leadership. My philosophy has always been basically, if I have a team of 10 people, if I have 3 kids as a parent, I manage them. I try to raise them all 3 exactly the same way. So when it comes to leadership and managing a people, trying to manage everybody with the same level of, expectations, the same level of communication. What I've learned, and my contrarian perspective on this, is that we have to become much better at being able to manage one-to-one. So rather than one to a team, it's almost that kind of what I would call the shepherding model, where I'm basically it's one-to-one. So I'm getting to know you, Steve. I'm understanding who you are, what motivates you. I'm understanding what your purpose is. And I'm managing and leading you in a completely different way than I am your counterpart. And I think that that's something that has been a major shift for me. And it's something that I see a lot of the leaders today that are being really successful. I see them implementing a very similar model within their organization.
Fascinating. What's the best investment of time or money you've made in the last 3 years?
In the last 3 years, probably the best investment of time and resources has been the writing in my book, because it was, again, from a personal level, it just helped to be able to clarify. It helped clarify my past, and I'm able to take that message now and be able to articulate that much more concisely with my clients and prospects. But the other thing is, the book has been something that has just opened so many new doors for me, from whether it's speaking or being on podcasts, or in many cases generating new business, because it really helps differentiate you from everybody else in your space. Again, this is something new that I learned, but I would encourage, I think everybody that's if they've been alive for 30, 40, 50 years, everybody's got a story to tell, and we need to hear that story. So I really encourage people today to take the time to go through that process of writing their book.
And I might have to start journaling as a step one.
Exactly. It's a great place.
All right. What is something you've changed your mind on recently?
That I don't have to be right. That there's wisdom in sitting with people and listening to them and gaining different perspective. It has changed so much in my world. That has it's really made a major impact on relationships, personally and professionally.
I love that answer. Early on in my career, my biggest fear that drove me to learn as much as possible was because I didn't know. I was afraid of not knowing an answer, not having an answer to provide, or being wrong, and that just drove me to learn everything. But I saw the older guys or gals, they would just say, "I don't know," with so much confidence, and I'm like, how do I get that level of confidence? So that's a great point.
Yeah, it's I think when you look at our world today, and you look in many cases, whether you're talking about politics or leadership, even it's us versus them in many cases, and the reality is we're all in this together, and there's different perspectives, and I see that so much when it comes to the difference in generations, from the Gen Z to the baby boomers today. There's just so much. We have a lot more in common than we do in differences. And so I'm all about trying to build bridges and bring people together to really focus on what we have in common to be able to move society, to move companies forward.
Absolutely. What resource, whether it be a book, video, podcast, any educational material, has positively impacted you the most?
There's a book called Running with Your Head Down, or Running with My Head Down. And I think that is probably the book that's had the greatest impact on me over the last 5 years. And it really talks about it's a book about an entrepreneur and builds a business, sells a business, but he goes through and shares a lot of not just the wins that they had along the way, but also shared the biggest mistakes that they made. And I think it gave me a completely different perspective, because I could relate to so many of the things, particularly the mistakes that got made. I could relate to so many of those. So I think, again, that's one of those areas. I was not a huge reader for many years, and now anytime I get just a few minutes extra in my schedule, I've got a book in my hands. I just think there's so many great books out there right now.
Excellent. All right, Chuck, last one. What one takeaway from today's podcast do you want listeners to leave with?
As we look to the future, I think that we have to become, especially for business owners and leaders, we have to become agile and adaptable. If we can't be open to looking at things from new perspectives, and seeing those changes that are coming, and the gains that you're going to recognize by becoming agile and adaptable. My concern is if you don't become that way, you're going to get left behind. And so the other piece to that is you have to understand that being an entrepreneur or a business owner, that journey is not meant to be done alone. So it's okay to say that you don't know, and it's okay to bring other people to the table to discuss those concerns or questions that you may have. And to be able to gain others' perspective, because that will help give you the insight that you need to really be able to achieve success, whatever that may look like for you as an individual.
That's an excellent way to round out and close the podcast. Chuck, thank you so much for joining me today. Last thing, is there anything you want to share, whether it's a resource, website, social media? Where can people find you? Anything you want to share?
I mean, where I spend most of my time on social media, specifically on LinkedIn. So please feel free to connect with me there. I would also offer up for anyone that would like a free copy of my book, Unprecedented. If you will send me an email with your contact information, my email is chuck@whitewaterconsulting.net. Send me your contact information and I will mail you a copy of my book.
Excellent. And I'll definitely put that in the show notes so we can make it very easy for anyone who's interested. Chuck, thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. It's been great to be with you.